Hi everyone, Hothany Boy Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the Uboa album, The Origin of My Depression. Uboa is not just a name I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, it's also a musical project spearheaded by multi-instrumentalist, singer, songwriter, producer Xandra Metcalf, who to my knowledge has been dropping music under this pseudonym since the earlier part of this decade. And now, 9 years later, we have kind of a breakthrough in the underground with The Origin of My Depression. Now, even though Uboa has been in existence for the entirety of this decade so far, it's had a lot of time to evolve as a project, the stylistic influences for the most part have continually orbited around experimental music, noise, industrial music, drone, dark ambient, even sludge metal and post-rock. The more abrasive and abstract elements of Uboa's sound seem to have taken more precedent as the discography has gotten deeper and deeper. And now all of that culminates into this disturbing, heavy, beautiful, and sobering album, The Origin of My Depression. This album is more than just an album, it's an experience. It is really something. It's a piece, a holistic piece. It is a supremely deep and cerebral dive into Xandra's most negative and intense feelings surrounding depression and a host of other things. Her experience as a transgender woman and also what I read as severe feelings of abandonment. She essentially expresses all these emotions through chilling soundscapes, crushing walls of rumbling distortion and industrial percussion. There's quite a bit of variety across the track list in terms of sound palettes and mood. The reason for that being, as we listen deeper into the album, it's like we're progressing into darker and darker territory in a pretty cinematic fashion, and the whole record runs at a very trim 40 minutes, spread out along 7 songs, all of which segue into each other and connect very holistically, and it all becomes a somewhat traumatizing ordeal. There are despondent lows on this record, there are violent thrashing and explosive highs. No question, Xandra has done an excellent job at translating what she's been dealing with into this record. Now, even though I find the emotional experience of this album to be pretty unique, that's not to say there aren't very clear stylistic influences I'm picking up on, or at least creative parallels I'm picking up on as I listen through the album. There are at least a few moments where I feel like I'm listening to more recent noise or power electronic artists like Prurient, or dark ambient and drone projects like Sun or Lustmord. I think Pharmakon fans need to make note of this album. I think Lingua Ignota fans need to make note of this album. I think the Body fans need to make note of this album. And there are even some acoustic elements of this record with lots of cascading notes and organic bits of instrumentation that just remind me of a Mount Eerie record, a Microphones record, just Phil Elverum's work in general. To go through the tracks on this project, because there aren't that many, the opener detransitioning sees Xandra finding her vocal footing over these stuttering, kind of sparse piano notes. It doesn't sound like much at first, a little confused, not sure where to go. It's a little standoffish, it's kind of unkempt. More impatient listeners might go into this thinking, what is going on here? This sounds so awkward. But very quickly, the instrumental ascends and fills out with all these droning, almost cultish vocal layers. It just instantly turns into this strange alien wall of sound. Then some weird sound effects popping up in the background that sounds like a poltergeist slamming something, trying to communicate with people from beyond the grave. The wall of sound eventually turns noisy, harsh, industrial. We have gone from strange euphoria to abrasive dystopia in a pretty incredible progression too. It's heavy as hell, and the sound plays very good. So this quickly segues into the title track of the record. We kick the track off with it being in a very strange state. We are hit with this very low, subtle, otherworldly drone that, while it may be quiet, I think it says a lot about the space that it exists in. It's like in a great hall. It's like I'm no longer standing on the mortal plane. I feel like someone's watching me, or I'm in a space where an ancient ritual is being held. Eventually, Xandra introduces these tones that are kind of clumsy, but also mystical, clanging, dull bells or chimes just overlapping. And on top of this, Xandra starts delivering these muttered bits of spoken word that talk about the origins of her depression, and it moves through a chilling progression. Like the opening track, the song builds wonderfully and reaches a very abrasive climax. The drone gets heavier, gets thicker, gets more menacing. Suddenly, the vocals are no longer muttered, but they are just screaming. Totally insane screams, not going from 0 to 60, but 0 to 660. And the vocals are not buried in the drone at all. They are very, very loud and very, very in your face. They are eye-widening. They are freaky. They are unsettling. They are blood-curdling. The track eventually hits a breaking point. We instantly transition into Lay Down and Rot, where suddenly we are warped into yet another chilling soundscape. There are a lot of similarities and parallels between this track and the previous one, in my opinion, but we kick this one off in a place where it feels like it's starting at an even darker and a worse point. Of course, it doesn't kick off at its most intense moment, but we eventually get there, and at this point, the album has certainly crossed over into a territory where it's just consistently horrifying, profoundly disturbing. More screams, more soul-sucking noise. All these hits of glitchy distortion just compound on top of one another until they're just pressing into me and I'm losing my breath. Being sensitive to the overall flow of the album, Xandra very smartly provides a euphoric spot after this track, the song EPILATION Joy, and while this song does bring back in some more organic instrumental elements, it's a lot easier on the ears, there's still something kind of sour about the background drone. The vibe of the track eventually sours, starts sounding absolutely horrid, and then we instantly transition into the noisiest and the nastiest spot on the entire record, and that is Please Don't Leave Me. Interestingly, the song kicks off with like this very quick gasp, like Xandra, or the protagonist, woke up from a nightmare, from a sound sleep in a cold sweat or something, and right after that gasp, we are hit with the most punishing, relentless, and frankly abusive noise on the entire album. This spot on the record is not for the faint of heart, not only because of the noise on it, but the layered demonic vocals, what sounds like even a gun loading or the hammer on a gun clicking. If you seriously struggle with depression or suicidal thoughts and you don't find music or art that dabbles in those things cathartic, because I know some people do, some people don't, you may want to avoid this record, because essentially this track feels like we are succumbing to another dark episode on the album, and this one is just the worst one. After this track, Xandra eases up a little bit, but not really, on the track Angel of Great and Terrible Light. We do kick the track off with these sparkly acoustic guitars and ice cold but consistent kick drum. It's a super duper duper simple progression, but the way Xandra builds on it very slowly, eventually reaching a point where it gets so heavy and roaring and blaring that it's almost deafening. That's pretty much what ends up making this piece so powerful. As I mentioned earlier, with some of the acoustic elements on this track, I am getting a strong Phil Elverum vibe, especially with some of the vocals being so off-putting. And Misspent Youth is a somewhat interesting and somber closer. We almost return to where we started on the album, the vocals, the pianos. It's sparse, it's open, it's meandering, doesn't have a strong sense of direction. The performance on this track comes off really lost and wounded. The pianos eventually fuse with these roaring bass tones that feel like they're something out of a Sun record. The ending wasn't as strong as I hoped it would be. There's not a strong sense of resolution to this point on the album, though maybe in the concept of it or the emotional reality of the experience this album is based around, there's no true sense of resolution. I will say the track does drag on a little bit, and this song serves again as many moments on the album where the vocals do feel just a little misdirected, a little too quiet. And I get that indirectness on the record is trying to make a point, but I feel like by the end of the record, that point has been beaten into the ground. So the whole thing does go out with more of a whimper than a bang. Still though, there are elements of this track I find captivating, and every moment up until this point is pretty convincing, enthralling, and moving, impactful. This thing is a powerfully dark record with a lot of great ideas on it. Not the most original or groundbreaking in these styles, but surely an emotional experience I'm going to remember for quite a while. I'm feeling a light to decent 8 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, The Origin of My Depression, Forever.